Hi, my name's Steve Adams. I'm a sculptor and engraver by trade in the metallic industry. In the year 2001, I discovered the craft of Hobo nickels. Cut my first one and it sold on eBay, and I've been hooked ever since. A lot of people have been asking me if I could do more demonstrations of the tools I use and the setup that I use. So today we're going to do that, and with some encouragements from several friends, this is going to be possible. So let's get started. Basically, the first thing you need is a pretty sound bench. Now, most of my work is with hand tools. I know there's a lot of nice air driven equipment out there, pneumatic equipment. I am not an expert in pneumatic equipment. But if you want to know how to use hand tools like chisels, gravers, punches, as well as a few other things, I've gotten a lot of experience in that actually, so I hope to demonstrate that to you today. Anyway, let's go back to the bench. For chiseling, you need a bench that doesn't vibrate, because there's nothing worse than this work moving while you're looking through magnification. The magnification I use mostly is an optivisor. This is a number 10 lens. It's 3.5 power. And I extend the lens just to give me a little more working distance. And it works out pretty well. I know a lot of you have asked questions about this lens and a few other things, but it really does work. It helps increase your distance from the work. So I'll go ahead and put that on. And that's it. You can see I'm not getting as close as what this lens normally takes. Normally you'd be here, but now I can stand back here. Anyway, so my setup here starts with this base. It's a tilt table. For those of you that might have back problems or neck problems, tilt your work if you can. I know using a stereo microscope is useful for those that have neck and back problems, but if you're using hand tools and an optivisor or something similar, tilt your work. It really saves on the neck and back. Okay, what do we have here? The tilt table, and that angle can be adjusted. What's attached on top of that is a lathe chuck. And that is merely so I can hold this other chuck. This is a 4-jaw chuck. Oh, I'm sorry, this is a 3-jaw chuck. But this is a 3-jaw chuck as well on the top. Now, check this out. I have total 360 degrees movement. Now, the top of these jaws have been milled to accept coins. This one is for accepting a silver dollar piece. If you can see this one, it's for accepting a hobo nickel, well, in this case a buffalo nickel. And I could put this inside here as well. I have another one here. This is also for nickels. This little vise is actually for working on punches. I can insert this into the chuck, and let's see if I can find something. I can insert tool steel into this chuck, and then I can fashion the tip however I want it, whether it's a bead punch, a texture punch. I can use various tools, including chisels, right in here to make punches if I want. Alright, let's get to the tools. First and foremost, I am a die engraver. That's how I started out, cutting dies by hand totally. What I use, let me see here. What I start out with is M2 steel. This is a piece that's 8 inches long. I have some that are 9 inches. Well, I see on the market there's also 7 inches. I wouldn't go below 7, but I personally like the 8 or 9 inches. This is 3/16 high-speed steel, M2. You can get it in round or square. I just prefer the square. Now what I'll do is I'll start grinding these pieces either on a large belt, stationary belt sander, or a bench grinder. All the time while I'm grinding, I keep water nearby so I don't get the tips too hot. Now here's one that's been partially ground. As I get a little further along, it starts to look like this. You can see the nice taper I have here. You have to shape the end, start to shape the bottom if you want it. This happens to be a semi-curve, one of my favorite chisels. Here's the same kind of tool, a semi-curved tool. Has a nice taper to it. This one's been sharpened up, and I always put a slight heel on the gravers as well. Oh, I'm sorry, the chisels. Chisels are a lot like gravers. I put heels on them. It's a slight upward curve on the bottom of the cutting edge. That way, when you're cutting, you don't have to hold the chisel low. You can hold it up a little bit. That heel allows you to do that. But I have chisels in rounds and semi-curves like this. I have it in flats. Sometimes I even use the whole width of the steel of the M2. And sometimes I take it down to even just a few thousandths. You can get as fine or as wide as you want with these tools, and they work out pretty well. But I use liners as well. I use V tools. I use angular tools. But again, I think my favorite tools are the semi-curved tools. Next in line, naturally, are gravers. I go with the same shapes that I do with chisels. I use rounded ones, semi-curved ones, and flats mostly, and some lines. A lot of the detail I do is done with very, very fine gravers. Now, many of you have asked questions about the engraver's bridges. All it is a piece of rod. You can use brass or whatever material you want to. And it's just a loop. And this back section rests between your index finger and your thumb. Some people use strictly rings and don't rest them at all, but I do. Now, when you take deep cuts with a graver on a coin, it's some pretty hard pushing. A lot of times you can slip. But this acts as a fulcrum, so you can get a really good bite and just use the tool for leverage. It really works well. You can use chisels in these bridges as well, just like you would a graver. But the people have asked about the bridges, and you just bend them to the shape you want. Here's actually a larger piece of brass. Same thing. A lot of my larger die work, I start getting a little heavier and a little more complicated, something I can hold easier. This one is steel that I've bent. And it works pretty good for die engraving. That's where I learned to use these, die engraving. Every tool on this table was once used for die engraving, still is, but I've adapted many of their uses for coin carving. This is something I typically would work on, a coining die. This just happens to be a portrait. But all these tools can be used on steel, but they come in really handy on the coin carving. It was in 2001 that I started this, but like I said, I've been addicted ever since. Some of the other tools are punches. What I use is oil hardening steel. After I shape the punch, I'll heat it red hot and I'll quench it in oil. In the future, there's going to be a video on how I make the tools exactly. A lot of the tools I use are actually sculpting tools. Now these are the kind of tools that I would use in plaster, but I found they actually work well on the coins as well. These are also oil hardening. The next step from this is actually pin vices. I'll take some of the same tools that are sculpting tools and I'll attach them in here. I'll take some of the same tools that are also like miniature gravers. I'll fashion gravers out of carbide or high-speed tools, steel rather, and use it in here as well. When I start doing really fine work, I've made miniature sculpting tools and miniature gravers, miniature scrapers. This is actually a little teeny tiny graver. All this is either leftover high-speed burrs or leftover carbide burrs shaped on a diamond wheel and inserted in this aluminum handle. You don't have to get this fancy, but I kind of like the way it looks, I guess. The next step that I use frequently for cutting are burrs. And the burrs are different things. I'll get a few burrs over here you can so you can take a better look. Now I'll use these. Oh, I dropped one. I'll use these with a flex shaft tool. These are mounted stones here on the end. Here's a carbide burr. They come in various sizes. One of my favorite burrs are these. These are the bud burrs. You really get a lot of use in modeling and fine work from these. And the teeny tiny high-speed ones, that's really good for detail and getting around in little corners and stuff like that. When I use the flex shaft, all you do is mount them in here. I have different handles, but this is one of my favorites. But if you'll notice, the bottom of this handpiece I've filed off and polished a little bit. And the reason being is that when you come close to the work, it allows you to get closer to it. This ridge right here would make you have to hold it up a little bit more. This way you can come at a lesser angle and get close to it. Some of the other tools that I mentioned before are actually the punches. I explained a little bit about the stock. But these are some custom punches here. Now these are mostly just curves and beads here. But the thing is with punches, I actually have 4 different sets like this. This includes beads, rings and flats, rounds, double beads, curved flats, chasing punches. The chasing punches I use to move metal. A lot of the flats I use to get into corners of things. But the textures are the fun ones to do. Now if you look closely at these, you can see here's a faceted star, a double rope punch, a feather, grass, a punch for making basket weaves, several fleur-de-lis, some floral, more rope, flower, some leaves, and some fine texture. The list is really endless. Shapes, you can do stars, flowers, whatever you want. Because you're making these punches by hand out of steel and then quenching them oil and hard, they last forever. So that's a really good thing to learn. And as I said before, this is something we'll be showing in a future video, how to make all these tools. But why don't we, right now, start actually demonstrating some of the tools. And we're going to start with the chisels, because that's my favorite. A lot of you actually thought I was using Dykem the bluing color on coins. I am not. I am using actually markers, permanent markers. A lot of times I'll use a Sharpie, whatever I have on hand. I'll use blue, black, red, and green. Today I just happen to have a green one. So we're gonna put a little green on here for this demo. This is not a dark green. I see this marker is kind of fading on me already. So it's time to replace. But that dries pretty quickly. By the way to remove this is denatured alcohol. So what we're going to do is start with a rounded tool. And here we go. I'm going to leave the Morgan face on there right now, but I'm going to start a little line around it, leaving part of it extends beyond my radius. You'll see what I'm doing. I'm going to tighten this just a little bit. There we go. Now it won't turn as easy. And for you pneumatic people, how does that sound? I like the sound of a chisel. Now it's not a perfect circle right now, but I can dress it up as I move along here. So when I get closer to finishing this outside, the circle will be perfect. And I'm going to stop right there because I want to save the image. But I'll continue right on the other side. I got a nickname from one of my co-workers in Connecticut one time because I was the only one there cutting dies by hand with a chisel. They called me Mr. Chips, and that's how I got my OHNS name. Decided to use that. Now I'll come back here and get to this point. Now that was just a rounded chisel. Now to my favorite. This would be the semi-curve or semi-rounded. Watch how well this one works. I'm going to actually, for this, tighten it up because I'm going to take a pretty good cut. But watch how much material this thing can remove. That's a pretty healthy cut. Now I'm following fairly close, but not extremely close to the face there, because I'll be finishing that off with smaller tools, and I'll actually use the flex shaft as well. I've got a medium carbide burr mounted in the flex shaft right now that will be handy for starting out along the face. And as I get finer and finer, the tools will actually get smaller and smaller as well. I've got a pretty good cut against this face with this curved tool right now. But underneath the nose and up here at the top by the word Liberty and near the lips is a spot that chisel can't quite get into. This is when I will probably go to the flex shaft. And I will. I'll make sure I have that flat side down here. In this case, I'm not reaching across, I'm here, so it's not going to hit anyway, but in the future it will if I reach across. And that's how easy that was. Just a nice little carbide burr. And I can go in tighter spots. Now I'm going to do this little spot right there, because this will get in easier than a chisel can. I won't actually be finishing up this coin today, but in the future there will be a video of the start of a coin right down to the finish. Everything I use, you'll see exactly how I do it, and even how I transfer the designs on here. And some of you might find that quite interesting. It's a little bit different from what most people do. I'm going to switch to the bud burr right now. You can see how that works. This is the bud burr. It's like a pear shape. And it's perfect for this curve too. Now I'm reaching across so you can see where that flat comes in handy. You can see how close I can get to that. I'm taking the point, putting the point in against the face, actually the bridge in the nose right now. That's a brief demonstration of the bud burr, but what I'd like to do now is show you how I use the bridge. We'll go with the smallest one. Okay, here we have the engraver's bridge, and we're going to use a semi-curve graver. This is a number 53 round, but I've turned it into a semi-curve. I find that converting tools is tools that you can currently buy are just a ways to get to a tool that you really need, and much quicker way. So to make this easier to see what I'm doing, I'm going to fill this back in here. Then you can see the tool removing metal. You can see how heavy of a cut I can take. I did have a little slip there. I was getting ahead of myself. Perhaps I'm a little nervous doing this video. It's a little new to me. By the way, I want to really thank my friend Robert Nolf, because he's the guy that's helping with me with this, and his business is Visual Logic. And how long you been doing this, Bob?
25.
25 years. That's Dr. Bob, that is. Yeah. So I got a pro here helping me with this, and I really appreciate it. A good close friend of mine, Robert Nolf. How am I doing, Bob?
Looks good.
Okay. I have removed more metal out of here, leaving the face standing more, but now I want to go back along the edge a little bit. So I'm just going along the edge. Giving myself a nice deep edge along the face. Because what I want to do next is actually start modeling the face the way I want it. And now that I have this deep edge, I can start tapering the face down so it's not as flat and looking more modeled. So I'm going to start with in front of the eye, but look how nice this carbide works. Under the nose. Under the hair, the forehead here. The nostril. Above the chin and above the lip. And the jawline. Now that I've done that, I can go back to the pear-shaped burr now. Because the pear-shaped burr is really good for tapering, sculpting, modeling. I'm running a slower RPM on this tool because I don't want to take too much at one time. But you can see how easily this tool, even at a slow speed, removes metal. It's the little things that really help you when you're trying to do a deep relief carving. The more sculpted the piece looks, I think the better the end product. As I said, in a future video, we're going to take a coin from start to finish. This one is merely a demonstration of some tools, what I have and how I use it. We'll have a video dedicated to how the tools are made as well. Those of you familiar with carving will know that it takes a while. Sometimes you have to destroy things slightly before you get it looking good again, and that's where we're at right now. But I could continue with this particular burr, this bud shape, restructuring this whole face with just this one burr. After this burr, I would go in with some finer round burrs and then switch to some chisels and engravers as I get closer and closer to the detail I want to achieve. But this, believe it or not, is actually close enough now that what I could do is go in with some die maker stones or mold maker stones. One of the things I use to clean work is a brass brush. It actually kind of leaves a satin finish too, and that actually makes it easier to see. Look at that in this lighting. But I can use put a little oil in there. Some people like to use kerosene or a thin machine oil. And you can stone these areas. Now you can take these stones and you can sharpen them on a grinder and get the points really fine so you can get in tight spots. So one of the things I would typically do after I get to the background where I want it with a graver, a chisel, or a burr is to go in with these stones and smooth it down a bit. I can also use that to take that tapered edge I was making down, make that a little smoother. One of the other stones that I like to use is actually called a ruby stone. This is one of my favorite tools. Now this is just a pencil, a holder for a pencil lead for mechanical drawing. But here's the ruby stone in here. It's quite hard. It's fairly abrasive, but depending on the pressure that you use is what you're going to get on the surface here. I know a lot of people are using ceramic stones now. This was a quite popular stone before the ceramic stones came out, but I still like using it. By the way, you can shape this stone on a diamond wheel. I use a diamond wheel for sharpening carbide, so I also use it for sharpening the ruby stone. Another one of my favorite stones is the RA series stone. It's kind of a fine stone, and it burnishes as well. So I'm going to use that. We're getting further along with this RA stone now in this background, that although it still looks a little rough there, I could probably texture on that if I used a slightly heavy texture. Normally, what I do is after I got both of these sides like this, I would go back in with a slightly smaller rounded chisel, and I would address that rounded edge to make sure I have a perfect circle. But right now, I think what I'll do is use a texture to put a nice field in there that will hold color real well. And there's what I want. A lot of people for the texturing would use a smaller hammer. And I do a lot of times, but I'm so used to using this big hammer that I'm able to control it quite well. So I'm going to lower my seat a little bit because I like to get my eyes closer to the work. And I'll just start texturing. Now this particular punch is about a 1/16 inch face, but when I was making it, I put a whole bunch of little texture. Actually, I used a burr, and I pounded a burr on the top side of this punch to make texture. And then I get the opposite impression of that texture on the coin here just by hitting it in. Are you picking up on that, Robert?
Because your hand's in the way.
Ah!
There's no way to do it without putting your hand right on top.
Can you see any of that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Once if you lift your hand occasionally, yeah, I can see that.
Is my hand in the way or not?
Nope. No, it's good.
As you can tell, people, this is a work in process. Trying to develop techniques to videotape this well. But I'm starting to have fun with this, actually. I think these videos will get better and better. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
Pick up on that?
Yep.
If I were to finish this, I would do this whole field on this side and on this side. Have the curvature like this has, put the texture in. In a case like this on this coin, I would be redoing the face, redoing the hair. If I were doing a nickel and a hobo, I'd be doing the same kind of thing, only on a smaller scale. Well, I think that's it for today. It's about all I can show with what's on this bench. But stay tuned. Eventually we'll have one that covers the carving of a coin from beginning to end. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I've appreciated the comments that people have given me on the tools I use, and hopefully this will answer some of those. Thank you.